Hey, what's up guys, it's Werewolf. Today we're going to be going over the final encounter of Salvation's Edge, the Witness. This encounter is nowhere near as mechanically challenging as the last encounter, however, the damage phase does get dicey and is usually the downfall of most fire teams on their first few runs. I like to start my guides with an overall objective of the encounter so that you know why you are doing each action, rather than just aimlessly doing a thing that somebody has told you to do. So the goal here is to shoot the witness's hands around the map so that you can obtain a buff called Glyph Breaker. The Glyph Breaker buff allows you to shoot one of his buttons on his little jacket, and this process needs to happen 6 times until all of his buttons are broken, after which damage will begin. From there, you rinse and repeat until he's dead. That's it. It's a pretty simple encounter, so with that out of the way, let's jump into the roles of this encounter. There are 2 different roles for this encounter. The first is the Ad Clear. 4 Guardians will be on Ad Clear, with 2 on the left and 2 on the right. There are a decent amount of annoying ads that will spawn that absolutely mess up the core mechanic if left alive too long. You'll also get some subjugators that spawn periodically. Our team usually gets them pretty low, but doesn't kill them altogether. They'll just keep respawning, and they take away a lot of your time and attention if you keep trying to kill them over and over and over again, and that time and attention can be spent on more problematic ads. You'll be able to take care of the subjugators before you go up to damage, so don't worry about them. The Scorn Chieftains are definitely priority 1, as they'll spit out those little void totems that give everything an immunity shield, and ads are really hard to kill when they're immune. Next to the Weavers, that'll yank you around, or even off of the map, with their little strand abilities, and then finally the Screeps. The other 2 Guardians that are not on Ad Clear are going to be called Runners, and this is where the actual mechanic comes into play. The goal of the Runner is to destroy the Witness's hands, giving them the Glyph Breaker buff, the buff that allows you to break one of those buttons. Runners will need to break a total of 6 buttons in order to initiate damage. Before we get into what a runner actually does, let's go over the different components that the runner will be interacting with throughout the encounter. As we've gone through the raid, we've seen a couple of the witness's hands pop out of different places and shoot different types of attacks. All 3 variants of these hands will be present during this encounter. Each type of hand has a unique attack, which has a shape and is associated with a certain color. I'll be referring to these hands by their shapes throughout the guide, so let's go over each hand and their respective shape and color. The 3 types of hands are circle, square, and triangle. Shocking, I know, it's the 3 shapes that we've seen throughout the entire raid. The circle hand comes out of the ground, places a circle attack down on the ground, and is yellow. The square hand is going to come from the sides, will send out a long rectangular attack, and is red. And the triangle will come out of the sky, place a triangle attack on the ground, and is green. Now when I say that they have a color, they don't actually appear that color, but the colors are going to come in handy in just a second. So how do we actually destroy these hands in order to get the Glyph Breaker buff? You'll need to shoot a hand with the buff that it is weak to. You'll notice that each hand has a little glowing wristband around it. By standing in the attack of a hand, you'll be able to shoot the wristband, which will reveal a color indicating the buff that the hand is weak to. In this example here, I intend to break this circle hand, and I can tell it's a circle hand because it's coming out of the ground. So I'll stand in the circle attack and shoot its wristband, which flashes red. Since red is associated with the square buff, I need to go get the square buff from a square hand, which again are the hands coming from the sides. So I'll go hunt down a square attack, and I'll stand in it long enough to get the square buff. You can look for the buff to pop up on your screen, however there is an audible cue that indicates you have acquired a buff, and I typically just trust the audio cue. Now that I have the square buff, or hexahedron resonance as it's called in your little buff section, I can go break the circle hand. As you can see here, I stand back in the circle hand's attack and I shoot its wristband. Be careful here. Since you are standing in the attack, you can acquire its buff if you wait too long. If that happens, it's going to override the buff that you currently have, and then you'll be unable to destroy that hand. So be quick. You'll pop in, shoot the wristband, pop back out. If done correctly, the hand should curl up and retreat, and you should have the Glyph Breaker buff. Now, you can break one of his buttons, but there are some things to consider. Shooting a button will spawn a pair of subjugators. Like I mentioned before, we usually get them to pretty low health so that we can kill them on the way up to damage. Otherwise, when you shoot the last button to initiate damage, a fresh pair of subjugators will spawn, and they can be very annoying as they suspend you during damage. In addition to the subjugators, the plate in the center will pulse when you shoot a button. This is how you cleanse resonance off of players. Teammates can let you know that they need to be cleansed so that you can tell them when you're about to break a button. You can also cleanse yourself by standing on that plate when you shoot the button. You can only hold up to 3 stacks of resonance at a time, and picking up a 4th stack will kill you. I chose not to cleanse in this example here because I only have a single stack of resonance, and I may get lucky when I shoot another hand. For instance, I go to check the color of this circle hand. However, it breaks immediately since I still had my buff from before. It's all luck, but it can save you some time. I typically cleanse once I get a 2nd stack of resonance just to be safe, since the weavers can pull you into an attack, giving you a buff that you don't want, or a subjugator can suspend you in a buff, and you can get multiple stacks of that buff depending on how long you get suspended in that attack. At some point throughout this process, one of the hands that you break will screech like this, and you will get a notification that the witness is testing you. Pay attention to the type of hand that screeched: circle, triangle, or square, depending on where the hand came from. I'll highlight the shapes on screen so you can see which totems you need to keep for each shape. In this example, the other runner got the screeching hand and made a call out to the team. They called out triangle, which means they destroyed a triangle hand and it screeched. So we need to make a triangle out of this grid by shooting the totems that aren't part of the triangle. After you successfully make the shape that was called out, the witness will attempt to do a team wipe. His eyes will glow orange, you'll hear a little pinging sound, and then he'll throw his hands forward. This will send a shockwave out, killing anyone standing on the ground. To avoid this, you just need to jump. This test mechanic will only happen one time before each damage phase. However, it is random which hand it happens on. It could be the first hand that you break, could be the last hand that you break, or any hand in between. When the 6th button is broken, the plate in the center will rise and damage will begin. This is the hardest part of the encounter and typically causes the most deaths. As you do damage, the witness will send out diagonal attacks that cover half of the plate in resonance. You need to move to the opposite side of the plate to avoid this. It's usually a one-shot kill. Sometimes a well can protect you, but it's not worth the risk. Typically, we'll have one person keeping an eye on his attacks and calling out the direction that the team needs to move in order to avoid the attack. If you're using a weapon with high zoom, make sure you check every so often to see where the next attack is coming from. He telegraphs it pretty well. You'll see half of the plate will glow orange. That'll indicate the half of the plate that he intends to attack. He will also send out a shockwave that covers the entire plate. It works the same as it does with the testing mechanic I just went over. His eyes will glow orange, he'll throw his hands forward, and then a pulse will cover the whole plate. You just need to jump over it to avoid it. Sometimes he will send a diagonal attack at the same time as the shockwave attack. Make sure you move to the opposite side before you jump. His diagonal attack can kill you while you're in the air. Luckily, the more that you do this, the more repetitive and predictable it becomes. He always goes right then left, or left then right, and then follows that combo up with a shockwave most of the time. The important thing here is to stay alive. It isn't worth getting that one rocket off if it means that you'll die to an attack. A dead guardian isn't firing any rockets. So keep your eye on his attacks, move out of the way, and do damage in between movements. This fight is a very comfortable 3-phase, with optimized teams able to do this in 2 phases pretty easily. Once you reach the last chunk of his health, he'll stagger and then go into final stand. His attacks are exactly the same, but you do not have very long to kill him in final stand. So if you can, save that burst super for final stand. Once you defeat him, your loot will spawn in front of you on the plate. That should cover the entire encounter. Hopefully you found this guide helpful. If you did, please share it with your fire team. And if you haven't already, click that like button and consider subscribing to the channel. Good luck out there, Guardians.